Alright, MSDOSX, welcome back for another day. Today is going to hopefully be a very short lecture. I only have about 6 or 7 slides. It's going to be real simple, but just, this is something that's often very useful in writing apps, so it's worth talking about it. Again, if you guys haven't already done so, please do fill out that survey that I put out for what bonus topics you guys want. There's a link to it on the site and also on Piazza. That'll really help us figure out what's the best order for doing those bonus lectures. So please do that. Okay, anyway, getting started today, we're talking about user defaults and saving state. So this is how you can really quickly save small amounts of data in your application, so that way app state is kind of persistent across launches of your application. So that way, when they reboot your application, it's right where they left it, so that way they can go right back into whatever they were doing when they were working on it before. This is largely motivated by iOS, because on iOS there really isn't a concept of saving, of the user having to explicitly save save whatever state they're in. The assumption is that the application always is saving kind of in the background, kind of saving automatically, and they expect that when they close the application and relaunch it, that it should be right where they left it off, so that way they can keep going and continue to work on what they were working on before. So that's really great for the user. They don't have to save; it just kind of saves for them. That's a tiny bit of work for us to make sure that that application is back where it was before. Thankfully, since iOS 4, that's actually not that much work, since the system does a lot of the overhead for you in kind of freezing your application state. But there are certain things that you might want to save just in case, just to make sure that you can absolutely restore back to where you were before you quit, because iOS appears to have multitasking, but the reality is when the user hits the home button and your application disappears, it really is not running pretty much. To the user, it looks like it's just kind of sitting there in the background, but it really is effectively quit. So there's a little bit of work in making sure that you can restore right back to where you were before you started. And it's worth noting that since Lion introduced the concept of auto-saving back to the Mac, so a lot of these things can apply also to the Mac, because you can, it's now sort of expected that a lot of Lion apps will also do automatic saving in the background. So when is a good time to save when you have some data that you need to save? Most of the time, you just need to save right before you quit, so that way you can kind of clean up and make sure that everything that needs to be saved is saved, and you just the common case is just in your application delegate. There's these methods. Application will terminate prior to iOS 4, and things like did enter background and will resign active since iOS 4 for when your application is about to go to the background state, and also when it's going to lose being the currently active app in case, like for example, a phone call or a text message comes in. So these are great places to save, because you know that you're about to lose your user, and you want to make sure that you save everything, so that way when they restart, you can go back to right where they left off. So it's pretty common in the implementations of these methods to provide some sort of saving utility inside of there. And a really easy way to do saving some things like user preferences is a class called NSUserDefaults. Like I said, it's ideal for like user settings, preferences, what color they like their application, these kind of preferences sort of things. Maybe if you're talking to some web service, you might want to store their login credentials or something. And basically, NSUserDefaults basically gives you a dictionary that you can write to and read from, and it stores it out to file on disk for you. But you don't have to worry about that. It's just there's this dictionary that you can write set values in and read values out of, and you don't have to worry about how the iPhone stores that data. You just have this persistent data state, so that way you can access it across runs of your application. So here's kind of the two example uses of that. There's when the application launches, which I'm going to skip first. So I'm going to do when we're about to quit here down in did enter background. We first can grab the standard defaults from the class NSUserDefaults, which basically says, give me the user defaults for this application. Then, like I said, it's a dictionary basically, so you can add objects to this dictionary. So maybe we have some person class that has a name, and we want to make sure that name gets saved across launches. So we can create a key called name, for example, and just set the value for that key to be the name of the person we want to store, so that way when we launch next time, we can get that name back. And then there's this synchronize method call that you call basically to say commit this, actually write it out to a file. It won't do it immediately if you just do a set object. You have to say synchronize to actually make sure that what's on disk is the same as what you have in sort of your local copy of the dictionary. And then on the other hand, when you're launching and you want to grab values back out of that dictionary, again, we just ask for the standard defaults, and then we message it with object for key, just like a dictionary, and we can get back some object. And then, now we have, of course, here now we have to have some conditional code because the first time we're not going to have a value in the defaults. So we might want to check that we actually have one before we try to set that value. And if we don't have one, then probably we'll generate one, right? There's quite a few other methods on user defaults. You can set, in particular, you can set things like integers and booleans directly without having to wrap them up in an NS number object, for example. It does that for you, so it kind of makes things like that. Storing integer values, storing boolean values, storing float values makes that really easy because you don't even have to wrap it up in an NS number. You just you just set those values directly. Any questions about user defaults? Hopefully it's pretty straightforward. It's just it's like I said, it's just a dictionary basically that you can set and read from.
Does the dictionary have any limits on what sort of object it can take? Can it take custom classes too, or?
I'll get to that in just a second. Perhaps slightly more general. Well, you'll see it's actually the same thing. But there's Apple's introduced a XML document type declaration for this document type called a property list, which you might have seen before. And all the built-in projects come with this .plist file that stores some information about the application, like the icon file, the default image, and kind of the name and the bundle identifier, and all these kind of things are stored in this info plist. And again, this is meant for pretty small data sets. It's in this nice human-readable XML format. And what can go inside of a property list are arrays, dictionaries, strings, numbers, dates, and data. That's it. So if you need anything else that's custom, you have to write your own serialization code and write it out to file yourself. But most of the data you deal with is probably going to be one of these basic types. Note, of course, that the mutable data types also work. This is just kind of the general. But and NS user defaults is a property list, but it just kind of adds a layer of abstraction for you, so that way you don't have to actually worry about the actual underlying property list. You just have this dictionary that you play with. So there are some convenience methods on NSArray and NSDictionary that allow you to write a dictionary or an array to file and read them back out from file. These are actually only available on NSArray. The root element of a property list must either be an array or a dictionary. You can't just put, say, a number by itself in a property list, because that's kind of silly anyway. But so it has to be an array or a dictionary, and you can just write it out to file and read it back. And you can even write it to a URL, which is kind of cool. If you have some URL on some web server that you have access to, you can write it to that as well. You're probably wondering what the atomically flag means. That's a way to make sure that that write is safe. So if you say atomically yes, then this will actually write it out to a temporary file, and then after that's succeeded, then move the file into the file you indicated. That way, if for whatever reason the system crashes while you're writing, the file isn't corrupted. You're just going to lose the auxiliary file. I would imagine that there's a little bit of a performance hit, so if you're really concerned about performance, you might want to risk taking it and just have it off. But it's usually a good idea to say atomically, so that way you know that the data is safe and sane and not corrupted. And then similarly, you can, given a file that represents a property list, you can then initialize dictionaries from that property list, and it does all the overhead of creating all the containing objects and building those out for you. These, of course, can be arbitrarily complicated. You can have arrays of arrays of arrays inside a property list. You can have arrays of dictionaries of arrays and all that good stuff, and it just all archives and unarchives for you automatically. Okay, and then one sort of last parting remark. You can have bigger data sets. These property lists are generally meant for things that are on the order of 10 kilobytes or less. They're not meant to be very big because they are stored in large XML, so it's a lot of text relative to the amount of data that you put in. But if you want to use larger data sets, the Foundation frameworks already have support for SQLite. All those SQLite functions are built into the API. So you can just call those because they're already built in. So if you're used to SQLite and dealing with SQL databases, you have all that. You can access all that. You can make your databases. You can do all that. We'll also have a lecture pretty soon about Core Data, which is Apple's data modeling tool for creating large data sets. And if you want to read ahead, there's a link that's probably out of date, but hopefully not, about Core Data. Any questions about that? Like I said, I hope this was nice and short. Okay, cool. So on Tuesday, we'll have our last sort of core lecture on, Glenn will be here talking about performance, kind of fine-tune your app, looking for leaks and that kind of thing, and really making your applications run really fast. And then we'll start doing bonus lectures. At the moment, it looks like animation is winning, so we'll probably do animation first, because animation is really cool. So yeah.